She still remembered the sound of the door closing that night. Not loud, not violent, just quiet enough to break something inside her forever. It was strange how silence could feel heavier than shouting. How the absence of words could echo louder than pain. She stood there frozen, her fingers still wrapped around the edge of the kitchen counter, as if letting go would make everything real. As if the moment she moved it would all collapse. He did not look back. Not once. The man she had loved for almost 20 years. The man she built her life around. The man she trusted with every fragile dream inside her heart. Walked away like none of it ever mattered. The suitcase in his hand was not heavy. But it carried everything he was taking from her. Security. Comfort. The future she believed in. And just like that it was gone. No warning. No real explanation. Just a tired excuse that did not even deserve to be called the truth. She did not cry at first. That was the part that scared her the most. Because when pain is too deep, it does not come out as tears. It becomes silence. Behind her the small apartment felt colder than it ever had before. The walls that once held laughter now carried a strange emptiness. Her children were asleep in the other room. Too young to understand. Too innocent to know that their world had just been quietly shattered. She slowly walked toward the door. Her steps heavy, like each one carried a weight she was not ready to hold. She opened it. But he was already gone. The hallway was empty. Just like her heart. She stood there for a long time. Long enough for reality to settle in like a storm that refused to pass. This was not a nightmare. This was her life now. Alone. The word felt unfamiliar. Unwanted. Terrifying. She closed the door gently. As if making noise would somehow make it worse. Then she leaned her back against it. Sliding down slowly until she was sitting on the cold floor. And that was when it happened. The tears came. Not soft. Not quiet. They came like everything inside her had finally broken free. Her hands covered her face. Her shoulders trembling as the weight of everything crashed down on her all at once. She was not just crying for the man who left. She was crying for the life she lost. For the years she gave. For the dreams that would never come true. For the future that disappeared without warning. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time did not make sense anymore. All she knew was that the world outside kept moving. While hers had completely stopped. That night she did not sleep. She could not. Every time she closed her eyes she saw him walking away. Again and again. Like a cruel memory stuck on repeat. Morning came too quickly. The sunlight slipped through the thin curtains as if nothing had changed. As if the world had not just fallen apart. Her children woke up. And just like that she had no choice. She wiped her tears. Forced a smile that did not belong to her anymore. And stepped into a role she did not feel strong enough to carry. Mother. Provider. Protector. All at once. The kitchen felt unfamiliar. The simple act of making breakfast now carried a weight she had never noticed before. Because everything was different. Everything. Bills were sitting on the table. Quiet reminders of a reality she could no longer ignore. Rent. Electricity. Food. Each paper felt like a question she did not have the answer to. How was she going to do this alone? The thought stayed with her all day. Heavy. Constant. She tried calling him. Once. Twice. More times than she wanted to admit. But there was no answer. Just silence. The same silence he left her with. Days turned into weeks. And reality did not get easier. It got heavier. Money started running out. Faster than she expected. She cut down everything. Meals became smaller. Nights became longer. Sleep became something she barely remembered. But somehow, she kept going. Because she had no other choice. Every morning she woke up not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Her children needed her. And that was the only thing stronger than her pain. There were nights when she sat alone after they fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything changed so quickly, wondering what she did wrong, wondering why she was not enough. Those questions hurt the most. Because they had no answers. Just doubt. Just pain. Just silence. But deep inside, somewhere beneath all the fear and heartbreak, something small refused to give up. A quiet voice. Barely there. But still alive. Telling her to keep going. Telling her that this was not the end. Even when everything around her felt like it was. And she did not know it yet. But that quiet strength inside her was about to change everything. The days did not become easier. They simply became something she learned to survive. Morning after morning she woke up before the sun. Not because she was rested, but because worry refused to let her sleep any longer. Her body felt heavy. Her eyes burned. But she still got up. Because staying in bed was no longer an option. The kitchen became a place of quiet battles. Counting every last coin. Stretching every small meal into something that could last just a little longer. Sometimes she would pretend she was not hungry. Smiling at her children as they ate. Telling them she had already eaten earlier. They believed her. Because children trust love more than truth. And that broke her in ways she could not explain. The bills kept coming. One after another. Like waves that refused to stop. She opened them slowly. As if delaying the moment could somehow change what was written inside. But it never did. Numbers. Due dates. Warnings. Each one felt like a reminder that she was falling behind. And no matter how hard she tried, she could not catch up. She started looking for work. Anything. Everything. Jobs she had never imagined doing. Places she had never thought she would stand in. She walked into offices with hope in her eyes. And walked out with rejection sitting heavy in her chest. Over and over again. Until hope itself started to feel tired. But she did not stop. She could not. Because giving up was a luxury she no longer had. Finally she found something. Not a dream. Not even close. But it was something. Long hours. Low pay. Endless exhaustion. She came home every night with her feet aching. Her hands tired. Her spirit barely holding on. But when she opened the door and saw her children waiting for her, something inside her softened. They ran to her, hugging her like she was their whole world. And in that moment, she was. So she smiled. Even when it hurt. Even when her heart felt like it was carrying too much. She smiled. Because they needed to see strength. Not the storm inside her. Weeks turned into months. And life became a routine of survival. Work. Home. Repeat. There was no time for anything else. No time to think. No time to feel. Only time to keep moving. But pain does not disappear just because you ignore it. It waits. Quietly. Until it finds its way back. There were nights when the silence of the apartment felt too loud. When memories crept in without warning. The way he used to laugh. The way he used to sit at the table. The way everything once felt complete. Those memories were not comforting anymore. They were painful. Because they reminded her of everything she lost. Sometimes she would sit by the window. Staring out into the darkness. Wondering where he was. Wondering if he ever thought about them. Wondering if leaving was as easy as it looked. The questions never stopped. But the answers never came. And slowly, very slowly, something inside her began to change. The sadness that once consumed her started turning into something else. Something quieter. Something stronger. It was not anger. It was not even acceptance. It was something deeper. A realization that no one was coming to save her. Not him. Not anyone. If her life was going to change, she would have to be the one to change it. That thought scared her. But it also gave her something she had not felt in a long time. Control. It started small. Very small. She began learning new things. Watching. Observing. Trying to understand how people built something from nothing. At night after her children fell asleep, instead of crying, she started reading. Watching videos. Taking notes. Dreaming again. But this time her dreams were different. They were not built on someone else. They were built on her. There were moments when doubt came back, whispering that she was not capable. That she was too late. That she was too broken. But something inside her refused to listen anymore. Because she had already survived the worst. What else could life take from her? Nothing. That was when the fear slowly started losing its power. She began saving small amounts. Just a little from each paycheck. It was not much. But it was hers. Every dollar felt like a step. Every step felt like progress. Even if no one else could see it. She could. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something different. Not happiness. Not yet. But something close. Hope. Quiet. Fragile. But real. And she held on to it. Because deep down, she knew. This was the beginning of something. Something bigger than the pain she once believed would define her. Something that would one day make all of this struggle worth it. She just did not know how yet. But she was no longer the woman who sat on the floor and cried all night. She was becoming someone else. Someone stronger. Someone who was slowly learning how to rise. Change did not arrive all at once. It came quietly. In small moments that did not seem important at first. A new thought. A different choice. A single step taken in a direction she had never walked before. At first it felt uncertain. Like walking in the dark without knowing what was ahead. But she kept going. Because standing still was no longer an option. Every night after long exhausting hours of work. When her body begged for rest. She chose something different. She chose growth. Sitting at the small table in her apartment. With dim light and tired eyes. She poured whatever energy she had left into learning. Sometimes she did not understand everything. Sometimes frustration made her want to give up. But she remembered something. No one was coming to save her. And that thought kept her going. Slowly she began to see things differently. Opportunities where she once saw limits. Possibilities where she once felt fear. It started with a simple idea. So small. So ordinary. That anyone else might have ignored it. But she did not. Because when you have nothing, even the smallest idea can feel like a lifeline. She noticed something at work. Something people needed. Something people were willing to pay for. At first she doubted herself. Who was she to start anything? She had no experience. No support. No safety net. Just a fragile belief that maybe. Just maybe. She could try. And that was enough. She took the little money she had saved. Money that came from sacrifices no one saw. And she invested it. Not into comfort. Not into ease. But into a chance. The first step was the hardest. Because it was filled with fear. What if it failed? What if she lost everything? But then she realized something. She already knew what it felt like to lose everything. And she survived. So she took the risk. The beginning was not beautiful. It was messy. Uncertain. Full of mistakes. There were days when nothing worked. When effort felt invisible. When results refused to come. She questioned herself again. Late nights returned. But this time they were different. Not filled with tears. But filled with determination. She kept going. Adjusting. Learning. Growing. Little by little. Things started to shift. One customer. Then another. A small success. Then another. Nothing dramatic. Nothing instant. But real. And that was enough. Because for the first time, she was not just surviving. She was building. The feeling was unfamiliar. But powerful. Every small win gave her something she had lost a long time ago. Confidence. Not loud. Not overwhelming. But steady. Real. Her days became longer. But they felt different. Work was no longer just a place she went to survive. It became a stepping stone. A temporary chapter. Not her whole story. She began to believe in something again. Not in people. Not in promises. But in herself. And that changed everything. There were still struggles. Of course there were. Nothing worth building comes without them. There were moments when money was tight. When she had to choose between reinvesting in her idea or covering something important. Those choices were not easy. But she made them. Because she could see something now. A future. Not the one she lost. But a new one. One she was creating with her own hands. Her children started noticing the change. The way she carried herself. The way her voice sounded stronger. The way her eyes no longer held the same sadness. They did not understand everything. But they felt it. And that was enough. Because strength has a way of speaking. Even without words. Months turned into years. And what once felt impossible became reality. Her small idea grew. Slowly. Steadily. Into something bigger than she ever imagined. It was not just about money. It was about freedom. About proving to herself that she was more than the pain she had been left with. More than the woman who was abandoned. More than the life that was taken from her. She had become something else. Someone stronger. Someone independent. Someone who no longer needed anyone to complete her. And that realization was the most powerful thing of all. Because the woman who once sat on the floor crying was now standing. Not just standing. But rising. And she was not done yet. Not even close. Because life had one more twist waiting for her. One she never expected. One that would test everything she had become. And remind her just how far she had come. The years had passed and she had built a life from the pieces that were left to her. She had learned to rise every morning with strength. She had learned to fight for her dreams. Even when the world doubted her, even when every door seemed closed, she had transformed her pain into purpose. She had grown into a woman who could no longer be broken. He watched from a distance as the woman he had once abandoned flourished. He saw her walking with confidence, her laughter carrying across the rooms he once filled with emptiness. He saw the love and respect people had for her, the way her family looked at her with pride and admiration, and he felt a hollow ache in his chest, a regret so deep it seemed to swallow him whole. He remembered the night he had left, how he had thought the world would go on without him, how he had believed he could escape responsibility. He had not realized the fire he was igniting in her, a fire that would forge her into someone unstoppable. He had underestimated the courage she carried, the resilience she had nurtured in silence, the quiet determination that had transformed her suffering into triumph. Now he wanted to reach out, but the words stuck in his throat. He wanted to apologize, but he knew apologies were only pieces of paper compared to the mountains she had moved. He wanted to take back the years lost, but time had a way of moving forward without looking back. He realized that the woman he had left with nothing had become someone untouchable, someone who no longer needed him, and in that moment he understood the true cost of his choice. She did not run to him, she did not crumble at his presence, she simply looked at him with calm eyes, a gaze that spoke of survival, of battles fought alone, of nights spent in determination, of mornings greeted with hope. She had become a living testament to strength, a reminder that some losses create the foundation for incredible victories, and he could only watch in silence as the woman he had abandoned stood taller than ever. The day finally came when he could no longer stay hidden. He approached her with hesitation, with a heart heavy with remorse. He thought he could somehow reclaim the time he had wasted, but as he stood before her, he realized that nothing could undo the journey she had endured, nothing could erase the strength she had earned, nothing could dim the light she now carried. She listened quietly, she did not yell, she did not cry, she simply let him speak, letting the weight of his regret fall into the air between them. He told her of the emptiness he had felt, the nights haunted by memories, the longing to undo the past, and she felt a flicker of something old, a memory of love once shared, but it was tempered by wisdom, tempered by the fire of all she had overcome. She forgave him not because she needed him to feel better, but because forgiveness was a gift. She gave herself the release of anger, the shedding of bitterness, the reclaiming of peace. She had built a life of her own, a life unshaken by the mistakes of another, and she would not let the ghosts of the past hold her captive. He left with tears in his eyes, he left with the heavy realization that life had moved on without him. He had lost the chance to see her growth, to share in the victories he had abandoned, but in losing her he had witnessed the power of her resilience, the beauty of a woman who had taken everything thrown at her, and had turned it into triumph. She remained standing in the sunlight, her heart open yet guarded, her spirit unbroken, her path forward bright and full of promise. She had become the hero of her own story, the woman who had risen from nothing, the woman who had faced despair and emerged with grace, the woman who had proven that no one can define her but herself, and that sometimes the hardest endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Years later, she looked back not with regret, but with quiet pride. She had built a life that no one could shake, a life born from struggle and persistence. She had turned heartbreak into lessons, into victories. She had discovered that the world did not owe her anything, and that every door she opened, she had opened herself. Her children thrived, they carried her strength like a shield, they knew the value of hard work, of courage, of standing tall when storms threatened to pull them down. She had given them more than material things, she had given them the gift of resilience, the proof that even when life seems cruel, it can also shape you into someone unstoppable. Sometimes she thought of him, the man who had left the home and family he was supposed to protect. She felt no bitterness, only a distant sorrow for the man who had chosen fear over love. She understood now that people reveal themselves through their choices, and that forgiveness does not require reconciliation, it simply allows the soul to breathe freely. She had found love again in ways she had never expected, not through dependency, but through connection, through shared dreams, through the quiet joy of someone who saw her for who she truly was, someone who celebrated her strength without trying to diminish it. She had discovered that the deepest fulfillment comes from knowing your worth and honoring it with every step. And in the silence of her evenings, when the world slowed and memories floated softly, she smiled because she knew she had become more than the pain she endured. She had become a testament to courage, to the power of never giving up, to the beauty of a heart that continues to grow even after it has been broken. And she knew that life's true victories are not measured by what others take from you, but by what you build with the pieces they leave behind. The seasons changed and her life continued to unfold like a story written by her own hands. She had learned that the world does not give second chances, but that it gives opportunities to those who refuse to surrender. She moved through each day with quiet determination, her heart open yet guarded, her mind sharp and unwavering. She had mastered the art of turning obstacles into stepping stones and setbacks into lessons. Her work had grown beyond what she could have imagined. What once seemed impossible had become routine. Her name carried weight in circles she had never thought she would enter. She inspired people not by seeking recognition, but by living her truth, by showing that resilience is not a moment. It is a lifetime practice that blossoms in silence before it is celebrated by the world. She had built a legacy from nothing, and that legacy was not just wealth or success, it was the strength she had cultivated in herself and in those around her. She walked through her home one evening and paused at the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, each light a story, a struggle, a triumph, and she felt the pulse of life in her veins. She thought of the years that had tried to crush her, the nights she had cried herself to sleep, the days she had labored with aching hands and tired bones. She remembered the emptiness left behind by the man who had abandoned her, and she realized that absence had been a gift, a cruel gift perhaps, but a gift nonetheless, because it had forced her to confront her own power, to discover who she was without leaning on anyone else. And yet life had a way of surprising her. She had found friendships deeper than she had ever imagined, bonds formed not by convenience but by authenticity. She had learned that vulnerability is not weakness, that reaching out is not defeat, that true connection is forged in honesty and courage. She celebrated her victories, but she also honored her wounds, knowing they were the map that led her here. The scars on her heart were not blemishes, they were badges of survival, reminders that she had faced the fire and emerged unbroken. Sometimes she received messages from him, the man who had once walked away. He wrote of regret, of longing, of dreams lost in his own fear, but she did not reply. She read the words and placed them gently in her heart, a reminder that some chapters close not with reconciliation but with understanding that life is bigger than revenge, bigger than regret, bigger than the small spaces of human failure. She had learned to live in the fullness of her own power, in the vastness of her own courage, and in that place she discovered that freedom is not given, it is claimed, and she had claimed it fully, completely, and beautifully. She smiled as she turned from the window, knowing the story was far from over, that the next chapter would be hers to write with intention and love, and that the woman who had been left with nothing had become a force of life, unstoppable, radiant, and free. Time moved on, carrying with it moments of quiet triumph and unspoken victories. She had grown into a woman whose presence commanded respect, not through words, but through the strength that radiated from every gesture, every decision, every heartbeat. She had learned that life does not pause for anyone, and that the true measure of power is the ability to rise when the world expects you to fall. Each morning she woke with intention, each night she rested with gratitude, and in between she carved a path that was wholly her own. Her children flourished under her guidance, their eyes reflecting the lessons of resilience she had instilled. They had watched her transform pain into determination, disappointment into ambition, and heartbreak into the foundation for their dreams. They understood that the woman before them was more than a mother, she was a living example of courage and perseverance. And as they laughed, learned, and stumbled along their own journeys, she was there, not to shield them from failure, but to teach them how to stand taller after every fall. Occasionally, she thought of him, the man who had once abandoned everything he was meant to protect. His absence had shaped her in ways she could never have imagined. She felt no bitterness, only a strange sense of closure. The world had tested him with his choices, and now it tested her with her own capacity to forgive, to move forward, to thrive without waiting for him to return. The chapters he had written in her life were no longer the ones she clung to, they were lessons, shadows of a past that had strengthened her rather than diminished her. She found joy in the unexpected, beauty in the ordinary, and love in places she had once feared to look. Her heart had room for both vulnerability and strength, for risk and wisdom, for giving and holding. She had learned that life's richness is not in the absence of struggle, but in the ability to rise above it, to embrace the journey, and to walk forward knowing that every step is a victory. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, she stood on her balcony and breathed deeply. The city below whispered its endless stories, but she had her own story now, one written not by abandonment, not by regret, but by resilience and grace. She was the woman who had been left with nothing and had built a life of everything: love, strength, purpose, and freedom. She smiled, knowing that whatever came next, she was ready, she was whole, and she was unstoppable. Time moved on, carrying with it moments of quiet triumph and unspoken victories. She had grown into a woman whose presence commanded respect not through words, but through the strength that radiated from every gesture, every decision, every heartbeat. She had learned that life does not pause for anyone, and that the true measure of power is the ability to rise when the world expects you to fall. Each morning she woke with intention, each night she rested with gratitude, and in between she carved a path that was wholly her own. Her children flourished under her guidance, their eyes reflecting the lessons of resilience she had instilled. They had watched her transform pain into determination, disappointment into ambition, and heartbreak into the foundation for their dreams. They understood that the woman before them was more than a mother, she was a living example of courage and perseverance. And as they laughed, learned, and stumbled along their own journeys, she was there, not to shield them from failure, but to teach them how to stand taller after every fall. Occasionally, she thought of him, the man who had once abandoned everything he was meant to protect. His absence had shaped her in ways she could never have imagined. She felt no bitterness, only a strange sense of closure. The world had tested him with his choices, and now it tested her with her own capacity to forgive, to move forward, to thrive without waiting for him to return. The chapters he had written in her life were no longer the ones she clung to, they were lessons, shadows of a past that had strengthened her rather than diminished her. She found joy in the unexpected, beauty in the ordinary, and love in places she had once feared to look. Her heart had room for both vulnerability and strength, for risk and wisdom, for giving and holding. She had learned that life's richness is not in the absence of struggle, but in the ability to rise above it, to embrace the journey, and to walk forward knowing that every step is a victory. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, she stood on her balcony and breathed deeply. The city below whispered its endless stories, but she had her own story now, one written not by abandonment, not by regret, but by resilience and grace. She was the woman who had been left with nothing and had built a life of everything: love, strength, purpose, and freedom. She smiled, knowing that whatever came next, she was ready, she was whole, and she was unstoppable. The years had sculpted her into someone unrecognizable from the woman who had once stood alone in an empty house clutching the weight of loss and betrayal. She had faced darkness and turned it into light, she had faced fear and turned it into courage, she had faced abandonment and turned it into freedom. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night had been a brushstroke painting the masterpiece of her life, and now she could see it in full color in every smile, every laugh, every triumph around her. She had become a woman who no longer measured her worth by the opinions of others, but by the depth of her own strength, the breadth of her own love, and the clarity of her own vision. She had discovered that power was quiet, that resilience did not need applause, and that peace came not from having everything but from knowing she had survived everything. Her life was a testament to the fact that the human spirit is unbreakable, that heartbreak is temporary, and that those who rise after falling carry the most radiant light. Sometimes she would think of him, the man who had left her with nothing. She would feel a pang of sorrow but never regret, because she understood now that his absence had been the catalyst for everything she had built. He had given her nothing, and yet she had made everything she had needed from the fragments he had left behind. And in that realization, she felt a deep gratitude for the journey, for the pain, for the nights she thought she could not endure, because those nights had been the forge that made her strong. Her children thrived, her friends adored her, her community looked up to her, and most importantly, she looked at herself with pride and love. She had learned that the greatest victories are not always celebrated by the world but felt deeply in the heart. She had become unstoppable not because life had been easy but because she had refused to be defeated by it. She had become radiant not because the world had recognized her but because she had recognized herself. And so she stepped forward into the future unafraid, unshakable, and unbound. The woman who had been left with nothing had become the woman who could give everything and more. Her story was one of pain turned into triumph, heartbreak turned into wisdom, and abandonment turned into the most beautiful freedom. And as the sun rose on another day, she smiled knowing that she had not only survived, she had thrived, she had not only endured, she had conquered, and she had done it all with grace, courage, and a heart that refused to be broken. Her journey was complete, and yet it had only just begun, for a life lived fully, bravely, and beautifully is never truly finished. It only grows richer, deeper, more extraordinary with each passing moment. Even now, years after the storms had passed, she walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had stared into the abyss and found herself whole. She understood that life was not about avoiding pain but about learning to move through it with grace. Each morning brought new challenges, but she met them with calm strength, knowing that she had weathered the fiercest storms and had emerged radiant and unbroken. Her story was no longer just her own, it had become a beacon, a guide for those who felt lost, for those who believed the world had abandoned them, for those who thought despair was permanent. People came into her life in unexpected ways, friends, strangers, allies, drawn not to her possessions or status but to the light she carried, a light forged in hardship, refined by perseverance, and polished by love. She shared her wisdom quietly, teaching by example, showing that courage is not loud, that strength does not demand recognition, and that freedom comes when one refuses to be defined by others. Her home became a sanctuary not just for her family but for anyone seeking hope, a place where stories of loss could turn into stories of triumph, where despair could be reshaped into purpose. Her children, now young adults, carried her lessons in their every action. They spoke with confidence, they acted with integrity, they treated the world with respect and compassion, and in them she saw reflections of her own journey, the proof that love and determination can ripple across generations. She watched them grow with pride and gratitude, understanding that the legacy of resilience is far greater than wealth or fame. It is the courage to rise, again and again, and the wisdom to lift others as you rise. Occasionally, memories of him, the man who had once left her with nothing, drifted through her mind. She felt neither anger nor longing, only a quiet acknowledgement that the past had shaped her but did not control her. His choices had set the stage for her awakening, for the forging of her spirit, and for the life she had now built. She had transformed absence into presence, loss into opportunity, and betrayal into a powerful lesson in self-reliance and inner peace. And in the still moments, when the world slowed and she allowed herself to reflect, she realized that her journey was far from over. There were dreams yet to chase, hearts to touch, and stories to inspire. She had become a woman whose strength was not measured by what she endured but by how she had risen above it, whose light illuminated paths for others even as it warmed her own soul, and whose heart remained open to life, love, and all the extraordinary possibilities ahead. And finally, she stood at the edge of everything she had built and overcome, looking back not with regret but with awe at the life she had claimed with her own two hands, the life that had risen from the ashes of abandonment, the life that had transformed heartbreak into wisdom and struggle into triumph. She understood that her story was never about him or the choices he had made. It was about her. It was about the woman who refused to be defeated, the woman who had taken nothing and turned it into everything, the woman who had learned that strength is born in silence, courage is forged in darkness, and freedom is discovered when you refuse to depend on anyone else to define you. Her children gathered around her, now grown and radiant, carrying her lessons like seeds ready to bloom. They spoke of their dreams, of their hopes, of the world they wanted to shape, and she listened, smiling quietly, knowing that her influence had rippled far beyond what she could see. She realized that the greatest victories of life are not measured by wealth or recognition but by the hearts you shape, the lives you touch, and the courage you inspire in others. Even he, the man who had walked away so long ago, had faded into the background of her story, no longer a shadow haunting her path, but a reminder of the strength she had cultivated. He had left her with nothing, and yet in that emptiness she had discovered her everything. She had discovered the power of resilience, the beauty of independence, and the limitless potential of a heart that refuses to break. She took a deep breath as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson, and in that moment she understood fully that life had given her the most extraordinary gift, not because it was easy but because she had made it extraordinary. She had taken her pain and forged it into purpose, her sorrow and turned it into strength, her abandonment and transformed it into freedom, and in the quiet of that dawn she smiled, knowing that she was unstoppable, unshakable, radiant, and whole. Her journey had begun with loss and ended with triumph, and yet she knew that endings are only beginnings in disguise, that every day is a chance to rise, a chance to grow, a chance to live fully and beautifully. And so she stepped forward into the life she had created with courage in her heart, love in her soul, and fire in her spirit, ready to embrace every new moment with the certainty that she was no longer defined by what she had lost but by everything she had become.